We have Kelsey Hightower from Atlanta, Georgia. He calls himself a distinguished engineer at Google Cloud. He calls himself a minimalistic, so I'll keep this intro short. And we have many things to talk about, open source, DevRel. And if you don't know him, you should definitely check it out. Yes, so Kelsey, please introduce yourself. Let's start because honestly, it's hard to check everything you are doing. I tried, but you do so many things that I'm asking you directly now, like what you're currently doing, and then we start asking more about the past. And we talk about, of course, open source and DevRel.
Yeah, I would say currently I'm working on a new open source project at Google with a team that's launching something. You'll hear more about that relatively soon. In addition to that, on the Google Cloud side, where I've been for about 7 years, I spent a lot more time on serverless technologies. So Cloud Run is an area where I spend a lot. For those unfamiliar with Cloud Run, it's a way to run containers with the serverless paradigm, right? So it scales to zero, pay per use. But the idea is that you should be able to run more than just functions. And so we support normal containers, normal runtimes. So if you want to run Ruby on Rails, you can do that. If you want to scale to zero, you can do that. And some of the things that we're working on right now that are in probably beta or alpha for some people are the ability to run your applications more in the style of Kubernetes. So that's all the current things. Security and serverless are my big areas. And of course, still at Google Cloud, making sure that people can actually adopt the cloud.
Amazing, Kelsey. I really want to test whatever you are saying. So thank you so much. So let's make an introduction because I wanted to know more like about your life, like how did you become a developer, how did you get involved, for example, in open source. So let's start with maybe talking about the open source, how did it impact your whole life, if this had an impact on your life.
Yeah, I got into this field around 1999, the year 2000. And so for open source for me, it was more about accessibility. So when I wanted to learn this stuff at that time, FreeBSD and Linux were very popular open source projects, the most accessible. You can download them. You could buy a magazine from the store and there will be a CD in the magazine, and you can use that CD to install one of these open source operating systems. So if you were around in 1999 or starting your career, if you wanted to learn Unix, this is going to be the fastest way. So Solaris was still something you had to pay for. AIX only really worked with proprietary expensive machines that only organizations or businesses could afford. And so for the average person looking to get into tech, internet was not necessarily a place you would go to try to download this stuff. It would probably take forever. And so you would go and buy a magazine that had a copy of some distribution. And so that was my first intro into open source. And so in my mind, I took that term free software to literally mean free because I didn't have to pay for it. And from there, I think I learned a lot that method, got IT certifications, A+ certification, Linux Plus certification, and used that to start my career in mainly tech support. And so for a lot of the things that I was doing, I tried to use Linux to progress in my career. And I think the last piece here is getting involved with the community. So eventually I started to find meetups, right? A place you could go, give talks, and just learn from other people. And so that was my kind of entry point into this whole idea of giving public talks and just learning in public in general.
Nice. So it all started, let's say, with a magazine, let's say a magazine, a CD, but then of course there has been an evolution. And to be honest, I'm also interested into the speaking part because I saw you still make like amazing videos, presentations. So how is this world that I'm kind of new of public speaking, just 6 months, almost 1 year, maybe be connected with open source? Because as you said, you participated in many events, so something more about the public speaking experience, and then we'll step into the DevRel because I think we are going there.
In the open source world, just think about it for a moment. Most people are contributing software to some place like GitHub. There is no way in the world that anyone would know what you're building just because you put it on GitHub. No one's just going to just browse GitHub one day and probably find your project. You're going to have to communicate to the real world. And so speaking is just a thing that humans have been doing for thousands of years to communicate all sorts of ideas, politics, anything. And open source is no different. So if you have an idea, right, there's a saying, some people have ideas and some ideas have people. And the only way that people will learn about your idea and decide if they want to participate in those ideas is for you to communicate with them. And I still think one of the best ways of communicating with people is being around them, right? Of course, you can make videos. Of course, you can make a blog post, but there's something magical that happens when you're in the same place with them. And so for me, going to a meetup was about that. I don't know what I don't know. I don't know what questions to ask. And so I just want to be in that room and see what happens. And so for me, in the early days of giving a talk, I think the first time I gave a talk, it was at Georgia State or Georgia Tech University. And I just wanted to prove myself, right? I'm watching other people speak. And the question I had was, can I do this too, right? And so my first talk was at a Python meetup in Atlanta. And I gave a talk about Python versus Haskell. And we were talking about the details of list comprehensions, right? A lot of Python's syntax comes from languages like Haskell. And so I gave this presentation. It was purely for me to be able to prove myself that I was able to get in front of people and speak about technical topics. But eventually it became an avenue to share what I was working on. And so when I was contributing to open source projects like, tools like virtual env and pip, the package manager for Python, well, whatever I was contributing, I would go to the meetup and show people what we were working on, show people what was coming, and give them ideas on how they can help. And so it became a feedback loop. You do the work, and then you talk about it. And I think following that pattern, whether it was at a large conference, a small meetup, I think a lot of people gravitated to that style. Hey, here's the thing that I'm working on. Let me show it to you. And so that's why I got into public speaking as part of the feedback loop for the actual work.
Nice, Kelsey. I love that. And what you're saying, we can see that it's simple. Like you put it in simple words. Like if you want to have a communication with someone, you should speak about your projects, speaking about what you're doing. But then putting this in action is not the same thing sometimes. And then we don't know, probably because there are some blockers, or maybe, I don't know, we feel that we are not good enough. For example, something like, am I good enough to jump on a stage and talk about this that I learned last week? So what do you think about this? Should someone be a public speaker just because they want to share their experience, or they should first become very expert into something and then apply to become a public speaker?
When I'm thinking about content, I'm thinking about a person standing next to me that is interested in learning something. So my style tends to say, if I'm working on something and it makes me excited, then I know that this is probably something that I feel that I would like to talk about and try to recreate that emotional response that I had. Like, I'm really excited about this. And if I can do the same thing on stage, then the people in the audience, well, they get excited too, right? Because it's the same feeling recaptured in a narrative. So I like to wrap a story around it. So if it's someone you work with all the time, or maybe it's a friend, just notice how natural you are when you talk to them. You use simple words. You leverage your body language, you use intention, you use silence. But I think when people are uncomfortable, whether it's on a big stage, people they don't know, they tend to overdo it, right? They use complex words, too many pictures, too many slides, and then it can feel unnatural for everyone that's involved. And so I would say this is that everyone knows how to do public speaking because that's just what you do in general. And then getting comfortable speaking in larger audience in front of people you don't know, that's something that just takes time. And look, if you want to do it, you'll probably figure it out.
Yes, probably it's because, I don't know, we're anxious. We are more focused on what people could think about us rather than us communicating to what we learned, what we want to communicate. And this can be, as you said, on different levels. So yes, I totally agree with that. And this is a great tip if you want to get started with public speaking. So do less, maybe just try to be focused maybe on the message that you want to communicate. So, Kelsey, can you say that you were doing the DevRel, so developer relations, even before becoming a developer advocate? So, I asked this, I think, to about 200 people. So, I'll try with you, so because I never had like one single definition. So, what is DevRel for you, and what DevRel does mean for you from your point of view and your huge experience in this role.
If I were to talk to a marketing department, they may say DevRel is a way to hire people who can relate to developers. And so in that case, it could be, let's make a video on YouTube in a way that a developer would like. So let's go and look at how videos are consumed by developers, and let's just copy that. So in the copy and paste sense, DevRel will be that, right? But I think if you think about just that combination of the words, like developer relations, how do you relate to a person who's a developer? And some people would say it takes one to know one. And so people who have done the job before can understand the nuance in what they're saying. And I think in the world of DevRel, the live demo is so important. If you've never used the tool, then you are basically evangelizing, right? You're just saying, use it because I believe in it. Why do you believe in it? Because I'm being paid to believe in it, right? That could be a valid reason. So since I'm being paid well to believe in it, I need you to believe in it too, so we can keep the whole thing going. And that is a raw form of evangelism. And then advocacy is very different, in my opinion. Advocacy is going to be more around, we have this thing that we've built. I have a thing that I've built. It's not usable by my target set of users. And these could also be paying customers. Why can't they use it? Who's going to advocate on their behalf? What bugs should be prioritized to be fixed? And so at the end of the day, there are a large group of consumers, whether they're users or paying customers, that happen to be developers. Those developers are now making independent decisions on the tools and products that they want to buy. So traditional marketing is not effective to that group of people. You can't just show them an ad and expect them to go and take an action. They need to see something way more authentic, right? When Nike wants to sell shoes, then they have to show those shoes being worn by professional athletes, right? If I see my favorite athlete wearing a certain set of shoes, I say, hey, those shoes must be good, because if the best professional is wearing them to do their job, they're going to work for me, even though I'm just playing at the local gym. And I think developers are the same way. I need to see it in action, and I need to understand that you understand what I'm trying to do. And if that's the case, then you have a way to effectively communicate. The unfortunate part about DevRel, though, people have used it to create another HR box, right? You join a company and they say, you are in DevRel. And then you may focus on the activities, right? I think a lot of people will say, oh, DevRel means creating videos, giving conference talks, getting likes and retweets. Those are activities. They may not result in any impact. And I think a lot of people in DevRel struggle with the difference between impact and activities. Impact is where you grow adoption, maybe increase revenue. And so I think the biggest challenge of that HR title is that, honestly, the set of techniques for communicating authentically with developers should be shared by everyone in the organization that is building something, and they should approach product development with empathy for that actual end user. So that's the way I think about DevRel. I think at a high level, it's a philosophy to communicate with authenticity to a developer community. And in terms of a role, you need to think about the differences between activities and impact.
Thank you, Kelsey. We are having a lot of questions, so if that's okay for you, I will start with some of them because they are piling up. So, which is the best DX developer experience you've seen so far? And why is it the best?
The best developer experience you never see, because it's the best. It's hidden. If it's in my way, then it cannot be the best if I have to think about it. This is why people like key bindings. I can choose a combination of keys and commit to muscle memory, and it fades away. I don't even think about it. It's a hidden feature. There is no UI. There is no pop-up. That's one of the best developer experiences in the world. And this is when developers that have ever used something like Emacs or Vim, and when they go to a different IDE, what is the first thing they try to do? They try to get their key bindings back, because they turn their workflow into a set of key presses to speed things up. Think about autocomplete in the IDE. I'm typing, I hit period on a function, and I hit tab, and it autocompletes the rest of the work. That's a very powerful developer experience because it's so transparent. It's completely out of the way. So to me, the best developer experience is the one you can't see.
Perfect. Okay. Let's go with this one about commercial open source software. Which are your thoughts about this? And I see a lot of companies join the CNCF landscape.
My personal opinion here is that, if depending on the type of software you're building, a lot of people won't use that software unless it's open source, right? When it comes to like computing platforms, programming languages, maybe it's a specialized programming language. Maybe some people would pay to use it. But in general, there's so much competition in the open source space. There's so much innovation in the open source space. For many organizations, you're almost kind of forced to start. And I think with open source being your starting point, it gives you a chance to really think through your go-to-market strategy, build that viable product, and then attract a bunch of community developers that are willing to exercise your product and be willing to adopt it before you find the perfect price, the perfect entry point, maybe even before it's completely finished. So when it comes to like the CNCF landscape, there's many reasons to do it. Some companies, they want to see that you have a really good governance model. They want to know that if you go out of business, remember, not every startup is going to make it. And so what happens if your startup goes away? Well, if I'm a large institution, I expect this technology to work for decades. And so we need to know that it's going to be around longer than the maintainers will be around. And so I think CNCF and other foundations, they provide a landing place for governance, things like IP. Can you use the trademark? And also there's an opportunity for people to be very clear about their governance model and how they choose to collaborate long-term. So to me, commercial open source should be very little difference than normal open source, but we just got to have a community agreement on what things do I have to pay for, and will you stop me from competing with you on the open side?
Yeah, I agree with that. There is nothing wrong with trying to get some, of course it makes sense. And as you said, also, you should always be clear about our intentions. If you make things clear since the beginning, you're good to go. We have also many questions about the DevRel side. So now let's get some of them, if that's okay for you. So you were talking about your experience in meetups, but now I would like to ask you, like, how has been like your first experience or your first experiences in DevRel? Because I think that many people here, they want to get started in some way. So from your point of view, what is the best way to start, and about your especially first experiences?
I didn't do DevRel until 13 years in the industry. I've done tech support, system administration. I worked inside of the data centers. And so you take this combination of 13 years and you join Google Cloud. And remember, when I joined Google Cloud, I was a contributor to Kubernetes. So when I joined Google, I was joining Google for flexibility. And one of the most flexible roles at Google at that time was developer relations. I had never done it before. And so for me, I looked at that and says, okay, I do not want to be put in a box. At that time, 7 years ago, all I knew about DevRel was people who focus on creating activities. That's not what I do. I like revenue. I like business. I like understanding how to make a product so good that people want to pay for it. I also know that you actually have to build the actual product, and you have to prioritize what to build. It starts with the work. Figure out what the work is. How do you actually figure out what the work is? Go look at what the profit and loss statement is. The thing you work on, does it make any money? Do customers like it? If it's not meeting those monetary goals, why? Your job is to go find out. How do you find out? You go spend time with actual customers. You sit with them, you whiteboard with them, you listen deeply, and then you take all the noise and you translate it into priority. The thing that helped me most, though, is having the 13 years of prior experience. Because now I don't just talk about the product, I can talk about the reality of adopting that product over time. So now what do I think out there not being in DevRel anymore? So I got out of DevRel 2 years ago. I think most people should understand what this discipline is and leverage it. If you're a PM, you got to learn how to communicate and write really clear user journeys about how your product will be used, how it's currently being used, and how to improve it, and set priorities around that. If you're an engineer, the reason why I started the empathetic engineering program at Google is because I wanted engineers to know what it's like to use their product from a customer perspective so they can approach their work with empathy. How will people actually authenticate to your product? Is it compatible with the market is doing? And so I think now that I go back and revisit that experience, I think everyone can learn something from it, but I think it's all about what you bring to the table. Remember, I keep going back to it, impact versus activities, because they're not always the same thing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kelsey. I think that basically what you are communicating is that you should be patient. And I like this approach, which is bottom up. So you build up from the basics. You start from, as you said, like start from building. And then I think in that case, you can really understand and put in communication the company, the customers, the users. I think that many people think that like being DevRel, it's easy. Like you just stay a bit of time on Twitter, then you make a couple of live streams, and then you are done. And you can call your day. So if you're a DevRel, you know already know that it's not that. But like I would like to ask you directly, which are some common challenges that you faced in DevRel and how you overcome them, if you manage to overcome them, of course.
There are a lot of people who are in the tech industry that have zero communication skills. And so for them, they believe that communication skills are not required to be successful. Now, unfortunately for that person, they don't understand how much of their career has been limited by not being able to communicate. So they have no frame of reference. And so imagine when people who watch people do these things, like all you do is tweet. Well, because they believe that writing a tweet is easy, right? Because they can tweet too, right? My shoes are red. And then they get 1 million likes on Twitter. And they're like, see, I can do it. So what's the difference between me and you, right? And so that is one way to frame this kind of discussion. One of the challenges I had, and it was amazing because people thought I was just someone who was just talking at a conference based on a deck or demo that someone else built for me. And so I'm speaking at a conference and I'm talking about Kubernetes and the low-level details on how it's implemented. And someone just asked this question, assuming that I couldn't answer it. And they were like, what happens if the consistency model of Kubernetes were to get messed up? Wouldn't the whole system break? And I was like, well, that's not how etcd works. We talked a little bit about CAP theorem, and I showed them that etcd leans towards consistency. And this is some computer scientist, and he was debating the CAP theorem. I was like, listen, you only have certain rules. CAP theorem is good enough to explain the situation. If we can't have consistency in Kubernetes, then the system stops. And he didn't believe me. So I said, all right, let me show you. If you turn etcd off, what will happen? It won't accept any changes. You're going to get an error because it's leaning towards consistency. So we sacrifice availability because there's a network partition. There you go. This is in simple terms. Now I'm going to show you what happens when we bring it back, but don't have a quorum. But in that case, I found that throughout the years, before people understood my background, I had to explain to them that I'm a contributor to Kubernetes. I have commit access. I wrote the book you're reading. Look at the bottom. I'm the author. That's my name. And so people would get confused that they didn't understand that just because you're speaking on a stage, that you don't know how to actually write code. So I think those are the challenges. But it's always been fun. But I think there's a lot of bias where people will sometimes try to shame people who are very popular on YouTube or Twitter and claim that they are not real engineers. And I think that is just literally pretty sad to see because it just isn't true all the time.
Okay, nice. So let's give with a couple of more questions. The metric, like are DevRel currently working? Are they currently doing something? So how can we measure how much weight we are lifting in DevRel? Which are the best KPI or way to measure what we are doing?
There's probably a good answer somewhere. My opinion is that in business, whether you like it or not, let's talk about business. Businesses tend to exist to generate money from the things that they choose to build. That's also pretty straightforward. And if you choose to join a company on that mission, you expect payment. And in order to pay you, the thing that they're building must be something that people want to pay for. Now, in the open source community, it's a little different. What's the metric? Well, if it's an open source project, your metric is that you may just want to share it with the world. And I've created projects before where I just say, I'm going to put it on GitHub, and that's it. There will be no maintenance. I'm not looking at it, and I'm not fixing any bugs, and I expect no payment from you either. If you don't like it, you can fork it, and you can do whatever you want with it. Now, let's say I wanted to have a popular open source project, and I want the number of GitHub stars to grow. So then you may wake up every morning, and you look at your number of GitHub stars, right? And you say, I want more stars. So what would you do to get more stars? You would probably tweet about your GitHub project, right? You would say, hey, check out my GitHub project. And then you would say something like, And if you like it, please give it a star. There has to be a call to action. And so then you wake up the next morning and you have more GitHub stars than before. And so you know something is working. So you're going to keep doing those activities. Why are you doing those activities? Because they're having the impact that you set out to measure, which is GitHub stars. Now, in this case, you still have no money. So now let's apply it to business. So instead of GitHub stars, the business wants money. So now think about the activities you need to do in order to get money now. So as a person doing DevRel, your manager could say, we want more people to read this blog post. People are still going to be mad at you because if I'm the business and I find out that all you're doing is writing blog posts and you tell me, hey, look at this chart. The number of people reading our blog post has gone up. And if I'm the business and I have to pay you, I say, but we're not making any money. We care about money. You care about blog post views. We have a disconnect. So when people ask me, what's the best metrics? Let's not fool ourselves. If you work at a company that must make money to survive and to pay you, by the way, there's really only one metric. Are your activities having an impact on the money? If the answer is yes, then to me, in my personal experience, DevRel gets way easier. So if you say, I went to a conference and I got 3 new customers that are each paying us $100 million, I promise you, no one's going to ask you about any other metrics. So if you write a blog post, are people even reading it? That's good to know. I'm not saying it's unnecessary. It's good to know. But boy, I'd rather have revenue over blog views.
I like this idea of like trying to work really hand in hand with your team. So, Kelsey, maybe we have the very last one. It was about open source. Like, what do you think it might be the future of open source? How has the use of open source evolved? What do you see can be its future?
They say that the future is easy to predict if you're working on it. And when it comes to software, I think open source has demonstrated what happens when you have a large collection of people come together and have alignment on what they want the future to be. And so you can just create any project that you want. There is no company that has to give you permission. You don't even have to have an aim to make money. You can do whatever you want, and you can attract people to collaborate with you from anywhere in the world. What happens when people who want to solve healthcare, people who want to make education better, who want to automate legal defense, people who want to tackle finance? So when you bring those different people together and then they get to try to solve that new problem with code, then I think what you're going to find out is that software can be applied to other domains. And so I think the future is going to be more collaboration from people who are just not developers or software people. You're going to have software people combined with domain experts to come together and then open source the solution. I think that is 100% the future. So the future will be defined by people coming together to solve a problem that can happily and somewhat be solved by leveraging software as part of the solution.
Nice, amazing. So basically, it will be focused more on the open rather than the source. So the open part will be probably the most relevant part. So, Kelsey, before we close, do we want to say like which are your plans? Did you make plans for 2023?
My plans is to keep doing what I've been doing. I've been fairly successful, and I never stop learning. And look, if you have one big takeaway, when we talk about open source and DevRel, activities and impact are not always the same thing. And just try to figure out how to align yourself strategically to get these things to move closer. And if you focus on the impact, then I think the right activities reveal themselves.
Thank you so much. And best of luck for everything. Remember to follow him, of course. And yes, thank you so much. And bye-bye. Bye-bye, everyone.